Hi, I'm Sam Peterson from Millcreek Township, and today our guest is Holly Cook, Director of Program Administration, and Kendra Wilson, Community Engagement Specialist, both for Redevelop Erie. Kendra, Holly, welcome.
Thanks for having us.
So kind of give a brief rundown of, so I know the Redevelop Erie, is the redevelopment authority for the city of Erie.
Correct.
And there's a distinction between them and the County Redevelopment Authority. So kind of give a brief rundown of what you guys do and maybe what your roles entail as well.
Sure. So the Redevelopment Authority of the City of Erie, a little bit of a misnomer because we do programs and work all throughout the county, but we are distinguished from the county in that the County Redevelopment Authority, who we do have a partnership with, they do primarily commercial jobs, commercial projects, things like that. We primarily focus on residential housing rehabilitation projects for landlords, for homeowners, things like that throughout the county.
Gotcha. All right, so just kind of jumping right into it, I know one of the big things that you guys focus on is lead rehabilitation. So, what do most people think of when they think of lead?
So most people we've found when you say lead, they think about Flint, right? Because Flint was in the national news a few years back. They had their big water crisis. You saw the pictures of water bottles that looked like they were full of dirty water and all this sort of thing. And there was a lot of national outcry and outrage about that, justifiably so. The problem is for around here, everybody thinks that's the only problem. But what we know is, and this is true in Pennsylvania and also nationally, the biggest source of lead poisoning is actually lead paint. And in states like Pennsylvania, where our housing stock is very, very old, the prevalence of lead paint still being in houses is pretty high still. Most of our housing stock was built more than 40 years ago. Lead paint was technically outlawed for residential use in 1978, but it didn't just disappear out of houses. Mm-hmm. And that's what we get people ask that of us a lot. Wasn't that outlawed a long time ago? It was, but what happened to it,
So I know lead paint is kind of your primary concern, but how does the lead paint cause that lead poisoning, and then what does lead poisoning end up doing?
So lead paint in and of itself, if it's stable and intact, not a problem, okay? Where it becomes a problem is when it's deteriorating. So when it's peeling, chipping, flaking, it kicks off lead dust, which is, very fine, settles on surfaces. You'll see that a lot if you see houses with like old wood windows, and you can see the paint right on them that's usually peeling and chipping off, you start looking for it after a while, and we kind of know it to see it. But when you see that, you can assume there probably is lead somewhere in there in one of the layers of paint. Mm-hmm. And when you open and close windows or doors, things like that have that deteriorated paint, it's making the dust, fly around, settle on floors, windowsills, etc. And where that becomes dangerous, especially in households with children, is what do kids do? Everything goes in their mouth. So a binky hits the floor, a toy on the floor, a bottle hits the floor, or just crawling on the floor and hands being on the floor, goes to the mouth. Now they've just ingested lead dust. Or in the cases of, there are kids who will occasionally eat paint chips, which we've heard about. And apparently, I've not tasted it to verify, but from what we know, lead paint has a sweet taste to it, which makes them want to eat more of it. Mm. So you can see where that's problematic. And why that's a big issue, particularly for children, is because their bodies are very small. It doesn't take a whole lot of anything to poison them, but also that 1 to 5 age, which is what we really focus on, that's when a lot of those neurological systems are developing. And you said, what does it do? Well, that's the biggest point is lead paint doesn't usually look like, when it's causing a sickness, doesn't look like vomiting or visible illness, although it can in rare cases do that. It's more of a silent sort of poisoning, right? It's causing all sorts of developmental delays, behavioral problems, learning and speech issues, things like that, things that might not show up right away, might not show up till their school age. Occasionally in really severe cases, it can present in younger children. They can revert to being nonverbal. It can affect potty training, things like that. But it's really all those neurological functions that are affected by lead poisoning, and that's why it's such a big deal.
So is there like an effect that it has on adults too?
It can. But generally that damage has been incurred from childhood. So, for our lead paint program that we offer that helps address lead hazards in the home, it's primarily for homes that have children, pregnant persons or children 1 to 5, particularly because that's where that's where we know the damage is incurred. That said, damage that does occur in childhood, there's no cure for it. They can do chelation therapy to scrub the blood of excess lead, but whatever damage has been caused, that's permanent. That's not going away.
Yeah, fix it at the source.
Right.
So kind of going off of that, is there like a safe amount of lead? Or are you guys just looking to get rid of all lead completely?
So what we know is while the technical lead poison threshold is set at 3.5 micrograms per deciliter, which is a bunch of scientific stuff
Yeah,
that
I was
nobody
going to
cares
say,
about.
that means nothing to
Right.
me.
And what they'll tell parents usually is, just what the number is. And it's, if it's above 3.5, that's when they're referring them, for services.
Mm-hmm.
That said, we know that there's no level of lead that's been determined to be safe.
Yeah.
So as far as, you're never going to remove all the paint. That's, so we're careful with what wording we use because we don't want to say abatement because we know it's just really impossible to ever remove all of it. So our goal is to make it safe. So that can be encapsulation, which that's our fancy word for it, but that would be on a wall, if a wall has some peeling paint. That can be by professionals who are lead certified. That can be remediated by just smoothing out the surface and then, using special paint that's meant to contain it. If it's a flat, intact surface, that's considered lead stable. That's encapsulated.
Because I imagine the removal and demolition of that causes a lot of problems.
Right.
Same with say asbestos removal. It's because then all that dust gets kicked up, and it sounds like it'd be a huge process.
Oh yeah, and and people used to remove lead paint by themselves, trying to sandblast their walls, and we've still had people ask if they can do that themselves. We're like, please do not do that. That's absolutely not the way you want to do that. Our professionals that do this, it's actually pretty incredible what they have to do to seal a room when they're doing the work, and the amount of protective measures they have to take for themselves with PPE and things like that, because it takes so little of this dust and to become toxic. In fact, when we do jobs, when we have our contractors do jobs on people's houses, we relocate them for the duration of the work because it's just not safe for them to be there, because the nature, like you said, the nature of remediation work is it's going to kick up dust.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
and that's why in cases of things like windows and doors, a lot of times the remediation for those is just replacement. So, if you put paint back on that window, as soon as they open and close it again, you've just shredded it right back off. So we call those high impact surfaces. That's because that's what they are, and those impact surfaces, that's what's going to kick off that dust, and that's what's going to cause the problems.
So all this has me a little worried about my house. So you can't, so how would you see it? I know it's mostly found in the paint, as you said. You can find it on the windows. Is there a way that you can identify it yourself? Is this something that you can see with the naked eye?
So technically, no. It really does require testing by a professional. We have a person on our staff. Her name's Lou. She's what they call a risk assessor. She uses an instrument called an XRF gun. It's just a little handheld thing, and she uses it on surfaces that can detect the level of lead that's present in something. A good way to just kind of eyeball your home to see if maybe this is something you need to look into. If you see any surface, if you see peeling paint, it might be worth having it tested, but it tends to have a sort of alligator skin texture when it deteriorates. Mm-hmm. So that's usually a good indicator that that's lead paint. But that said, the only way to really truly know for sure is by having it professionally tested.
Okay. So then how do you guys fit into all of this? How does the Redevelopment Authority of the City of Erie, how do you manage this program?
So we have primarily a HUD-funded program. It's our lead hazard control program, and it is programs that facilitate the rehabilitation of houses for low to moderate income homeowners and landlords throughout the county. Under that XRF testing we just talked about, that's covered as part of the grant free of charge. And then, Once we've gotten the results back from that lead assessment and we know where the lead is in the home, they devise a work scope to remediate those problems, and they'll develop, their plan for what's going to be encapsulated, what's going to be replaced. Again, when we do that work, when our contractors do that work, we relocate families. That is also covered under the program. We take care of everything for them, from setting up the hotel, telling them when to show up. We pay for the cost of the hotel. They literally don't have to do anything but show up. We also offer the lead testing for those who don't qualify financially for the program. We do offer that service, the testing service, for a fee. If anybody's interested, they can certainly call us and we can help them get that arranged for their home, or to tell them if they might qualify for the program to have it done free of charge.
Gotcha. So with the housing that you see right now that you guys have been working on through this project, have you seen any trends lately? Are there any specific houses you guys are worried about, specific areas?
No, and that's the big problem with lead that people don't realize is it doesn't really know any socioeconomic bounds.
Yeah.
It's not confined to urban areas or rural areas. It's all over the place. So, we see just as many kids testing positive, in downtown areas where, we have those old houses that are, well over 100 years old. And then we see some really bad lead poisoning cases out throughout the county. So, all the way out to Corey, to Union City, Lawrence Park, we're just an old county. Pennsylvania's housing stock, about 70% of it was built more than 40 years ago. In Erie County, that number is about 72%. So even by Pennsylvania old housing stock standards, Erie is very old.
So you think it's more of a concern in the Erie County region than maybe somewhere else that's maybe has a lot of newer development?
Absolutely. If your house was built after 1978, you have nothing to worry about. That's actually not very common, though, in our county.
Yeah.
Not that we don't have any new housing developments, but most of our houses, as we know, are pretty old. And what we know about Erie County, even though testing rates for children is still way too low, we know that with the numbers we have, Erie County is about 10th worst in the state. And Pennsylvania is generally one of the worst nationally for lead poisoned kids. Statewide, Pennsylvania tests, our lead poisoning rate among children is about 2.3 times what Flint was at peak crisis.
Wow.
And even in Erie County, it's about 1.7 times worse than Flint was. So, and that's current. That's based on numbers from the health department, from the state. So it's a really serious problem, and a lot of people just don't realize how significant that problem still is. So the way we fix this is getting more kids tested. First and foremost, getting kids tested at least once, but preferably twice between 1 and 5. The CDC generally recommends once at 12 months, once at 24 months, just to stay on top of their levels. And that's the key to all of this, is to finding out what our true positive rate is, and to find out just how many hundreds of kids are actually lead poisoned in our county, because we know it's very high.
Hundreds.
Yes.
Wow, that's putting it that way. That just kind of putting a number to it makes it really have a better idea, understanding of how this affects people. And you talked a lot about testing. What does that look like? Where can you get the testing done?
Sure. So the initial screening is a finger prick test, very simple. They can have it done at a pediatrician's office, and that just kind of gives them the preliminary number. If that comes back high, they would then be referred for a venous draw, so just a quick blood test to determine the real true level.
And you said that they can run a certain procedure to clean the blood, the excess lead from the blood?
Yeah, if there's a child that has excessively high levels, we're talking 30s, 40s, 50s, higher, into the 100s, which is catastrophic levels, that's when they would generally be admitted, and they would do what's called chelation therapy. I don't even understand all the science of it, so I won't pretend to, but essentially it scrubs the excess lead out of the blood.
Yeah.
Again, not a cure. That keeps it from getting worse, from progressing, but it doesn't undo any damage that's already been sustained to the body. For our part, what we can do to facilitate testing, we have a great partnership with the Erie County Department of Health. We actually got certified with them, a bunch of us, to perform the finger prick testing ourselves. So we host community events, and we're available for hire at other events throughout the county, where we can bring their mobile unit out and we can do that finger prick screening on the spot, free of charge. They get results in like 10 minutes, and they know right away if their kid is testing high. If they are testing high, we can refer them back to their pediatrician, or we can even help coordinate care for them if they need referrals for a pediatrician or for insurance. We have great connections throughout the county to help get them set up with everything they need. All the resources that we know of that might be able to help them, get their kid healthy.
Of course. So are there any regulations about this federally or at the state level?
There are not. So the Biden-Harris administration actually is the first presidential administration that we know of that has made lead poisoning part of their agenda, combating lead poisoning part of their agenda. For the first time ever, the Pennsylvania state Commonwealth has had allocated funds for lead remediation in the state budget. It's not a ton, but it's a great start. And we were recipients of some of that, so that we were able to augment our HUD grant to be able to get to a few more units, which is incredible. But there are no Pennsylvania regulations or federal regulations beyond lead disclosures, which is, if you're selling a house, if it was built before 1978, that has to be included in the seller's agreement that, hey, if you bought a house, you've probably seen it, this house was built before 1978, it may contain lead paint. Or there's a little pamphlet for renters that they should be given by their landlord upon lease signing. And if they're not, they need to be contacting us so we can get that information to them. But it too is, disclosure of the potential lead-based paint. Beyond that, there's really not a lot of regulation or recourse. So really prevention and parents taking initiatives that's what we have to do. So parents really need to make sure they're getting their kids tested or getting their homes tested.
So would you say that's one of the most important things that parents have to do right now?
That's the most important thing.
Yeah,
that's the most important thing. If you have a pregnant person or you have kids under the 5 and under, they need to be tested at least once. That's the biggest thing that parents can do. It's a very quick, they usually cry, but it's fairly painless procedure, and they can have, some peace of mind rather quickly, or, know, hey, we need to take some action.
So Holly, I know we talked a lot about kind of the effects of lead poisoning, but what are some more of the specific longer term effects for those children exposed at a young age?
So we know a lot of things about what it's going to do long term, and the more that we study this, the more we're going to learn. But they've already detected, not only are there links directly to crime, going back to childhood lead poisoning, which I think are going to be really fascinating studies as my generation, I'm an elder millennial, as you will, as my generation, gets older and older and they're able to study that more, they'll have probably some really great data on that. But there's also some economic fallout that we know too, because the lead poisoning in childhood affects professional earning potential, contributions to the tax base, burdens on the healthcare system, the insurance system, which of course increases everybody's costs. And so our studies have shown time and again that for every $1 spent on removing lead-based hazards in the home, $17 to $221 would be returned in health benefits like higher lifetime earnings, tax revenue, reduced spending on special education, and reduced criminal activity. And this is actually a stat that we get from the Lead Free Promise Project, which is a statewide coalition of agencies like ours, politicians, pediatricians, all sorts of people from all sorts of agencies that all have one thing in common, and that's our passion for combating lead poisoning. They say that the Commonwealth incurs as much as $415 million in annual costs and lost revenue directly from childhood lead poisoning, including healthcare, special education costs for lead poisoned children, lost tax revenue from parents who lose time at work caring for lead poisoned children, and adults with diminished work capacity due to the lingering effects of childhood lead poisoning.
So there really is a financial incentive from the government level to get this program, get it under control.
Absolutely. And then, from a landlord perspective, I mentioned that we do also offer the service to landlords. And the qualifiers are a little bit different for landlords, but they're still getting basically work done on their properties for an 80% discount, which is huge. And over time, that of course increases not only the safety of the occupant of the premises for their tenants, present and future, but also improves their property value and the curb appeal, and so these are things that are great incentives for landlords to want to participate in this program, both because we know they want to care for their tenants, but also in terms of their investments, they want to add value to it, and that's something that we can help them do.
Okay. And so Kendra, how can people get in touch with the Redevelopment Authority of the City of Erie about this lead program and specifically if they have more questions?
Yeah, so they can reach out to our office through email. We have an online contact us available on our website, and they can always give our office a call. We also have our application available in an online format and a PDF format as well. Everyone at our office is pretty well versed in the application process. And we are more than willing to meet with people one-on-one to kind of work through that application because it can be a lot. If anyone has a child that they know has a high lead level, if you contact our office, inform us that your child has a higher lead level, we will kind of expedite your application, hold it as a higher priority, and kind of get that work completed quicker. And we're available on TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram.
All right. Kendra, Ollie, thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you, the viewers. We learned so much about lead poisoning and how it is a very serious problem in our community. Till next time, Millcreek, I'm Sam Peterson.